So this is Pakistan Studies Paper 1, the History and Culture of Pakistan, October-November 2017. We will be beginning with section A, which is primarily related to the questions in regard to resource A. So in source A, you have the Delhi Proposal of 1927, and source B consists of a placard or a banner on Indian University guest which says Simon, go back. Now the questions. According to source A, what were Jinnah's aim in his Delhi proposal of 1927? So if you look at resource A, Jinnah was keen to have Hindu-Muslim unity. That's one point. Then you have was prepared to reject separate electorates for this. Now in 1927, Jinnah had a very different viewpoint to, let's say, his eventual evolution towards wanting a separate homeland for Pakistan, for the Muslims. Now, the important points here are to consider that Jinnah aimed to have Hindu-Muslim unity. He wanted more Muslim majority provinces to balance Hindu majority. He wanted Sindh to be separated from Bombay. He wanted one-third seats to be set aside in the central legislature for Muslims. So this is the answer for part A of question number 1. Then you come to question number B, which says, how does source B help us to understand Indian concerns about the Simon Commission of 1927? Now for this you need to have a little bit of background about the Simon Commission as to what it was, why was it so detrimental to the Indian people, and why were they so hostile towards him. To understand that, you will have to see that this particular banner in context is very hostile. The reason for that is that Simon was not welcome in India. He was unpopular. His delegation was seen as unsympathetic towards the natives, and there were no Indian representatives on the committee. So because of these 4 to 5 major reasons, Simon was not welcomed in India. Then we come to part C. Why was Dr. Muhammad Iqbal asked to chair the Muslim League at Allahabad in 1930? Now, during the 1925 1930 period, there was a lot of upheaval in the Muslim League. They were not sure as to what direction to take. They had different conflicts with the Congress, and there was a lot of difference in leadership coming along. There was no settled leadership as with regards to Congress. You had Nehru, you had Gandhi, you had pretty much a settled structure of leadership. Whereas in the Muslim League, there was no central ideology to follow and also not a main leader to follow. So Iqbal, being one of the poets who was influential in creating awareness among the Muslims, was considered to be a very important role model for the Muslim population by and large. So he was one of the authoritative figures well respected by the Muslims. He was the first Muslim leader to advocate for partition besides Sir Sayyid Ahmad Khan, and he was very experienced in the art of oratory or verbal speaking, and also his poetry invoked a sense of nationhood and nationalism, which the Muslims desperately needed at the time. Now, question number 1, part D. Which of the following was the most important in the development of the Pakistan movement? Now, there are three major areas of concern. The first is the Nehru Report, the second is Jinnah's 14 points in relation to the Nehru Report and the Government of India Act 1935. You have to explain with varying detail all three so that you have your point across. So now, some of the salient features of the Nehru Report was that there was a lot of anti-Muslim sentiments. They were not given actual representation in the government. There were no separate electorates, which were all major points that were not welcomed by Nehru Report, and Muslims felt aggrieved by all of this, and they were not happy about Nehru's initial idea of a separate Indian state with a Muslim Hindu majority governing over the Muslim minority. Now, Jinnah, in retaliation to Nehru, devised his 14 points. So, Jinnah's 14 points were a retaliation of Nehru and his report. Now, and this also made a very significant break in Jinnah's desire to actually have a combined state where Muslims and Hindus can live together in peace. So this also was the watershed moment for Jinnah, and after this he actually he went into exile, and second he never actually talked about Hindu Muslim unity. So here he basically talked about the basis of the negotiations with Congress. It also furthered that awareness that Hindus and Muslims are two separate nations. Now, the Government of India Act introduced a federal system of government. It was disappointing for the Muslim League, which had expected concessions from the British. Muslims felt ignored by both Congress and the British, so the idea of Pakistan movement began to develop. Now, these basically point out to a very basic idea that the Government of India Act 1935 led to the mobilization towards Pakistan and the eventual resolution that happened in Lahore in 1940. So, talking about all of these areas of concern in relation to one another, and then giving a final conclusive argument that this led to the eventual Lahore resolution would be considered a complete answer, and chances of scoring a higher grade on that would increase. Now, section B, you have to answer any two questions from that, and we will be answering question number 2A and question number 3. So, in question number 2, they're basically asking who were the thuggy, or the people who are thugs, and so in general, thuggis were armed robbers present in central and upper India. EIC used force to destroy them in 1830, and they were a secret society which basically formed the basis of resistance against the colonial English. Part number B. Why did the East India Company become involved in the Indian subcontinent during the 17th century? Now, there are a lot of reasons for that to happen because number one, there was this immense competition at the time between the European countries. Everyone wanted to find the nearest water route to the west. Now, some by mistake or some by luck ventured into the Indian plain to find a lot of wealth, a lot of raw material, and also to establish their power in the region. So, by and large, the reason why British were so keen on actually having a foothold in the region was because they were attracted by the immense wealth of the subcontinent. They were actually pretty amazed that the amount of raw material like cotton, silk that was available there would help them with their exports. So they really wanted to cash in on that. And also, the British wanted to establish their foothold in the subcontinent and also oust the Portuguese and Dutch traders, which is also limiting the competition and influence within the region. Now, part number C. So part number C is, did Haji Shariatullah contribute more to the spread of Islam than anyone else in the subcontinent before 1850? Explain your answer. So Haji Shariatullah, he established the Faraizi movement. Now, the 14 mark question, which states, did Haji Sharifullah contribute more to the spread of Islam than anyone else in the subcontinent before 1850, demands that you talk about other people of that time. So, for instance, you would talk about the fact that Haji Sharifullah established the Faraizi movement, which insisted that Muslims should perform their farais. Apart from that, there were other people like Shah Waliullah and Sayyid Ahmad Brailwi who also contributed to the spread of Islam within the region. So, for instance, Shah Waliullah believed Muslims face problems due to the lack of knowledge about the Holy Quran and Islam. So, he translated the Holy Book into a more accessible language, which was easily understandable by the people of the subcontinent. And then Sayyid Ahmad Brailwi thought that maybe resistance is the best form of faith service, which is jihad, and he basically founded the jihad movement and he stood against the oppressors, which were the colonizers at that time. So, all these three people basically led to a more inclusive form of religion where people would be influenced by the value of Islam and the power of the religion, which the Muslims of the time were not really, supposedly, not really keen on. So people like Haji Shariatullah, Shah Waliullah, and Ahmed Barelvi all contributed one way or the other in the advent of Islam within the subcontinent, and also to form proper resistance against the British oppressors. Then we come to question number 3. Who was Warren Hastings? That's a 4 mark question, so this answer can be very simplistic and basic. Warren Hastings was the Viceroy of India in 1782. He introduced reforms in finance, judiciary, and developed policies relating to Awadh and Rohilla, and he was involved in wars against the Marathas and also Mysore, which is Tipu Sultan's land. Then we have the next question. Why were the Marathas defeated after the decline of the Mughal Empire? So the Marathas were defeated because their loyalties were shifted and basically they controlled vast amount of land but found administrating it difficult. Maratha leaders began to show loyalty to local leaders rather than the central rule in Pune. Afghans killed many Marathas as the Battle of Panipat ending their control, and all of that led to a decline in their influence in the region. Then part C of question number 3 talks about how far was Indian resistance to British expansion in the subcontinent successful before 1850. Now, there were a series of movements which led to some form of success, which is Tipu Sultan, Titu Mir, Ranjit Singh were all people who somehow thwarted the British efforts in annexing certain parts of the land, but eventually the British became successful due to one form or the other. For instance, they bribed certain people in Tipu Sultan's army, uh, others they were able to eradicate due to their advanced weaponry and actually take control of the entire region. So, overall, the British were successful, but there were instances during or before 1850 where the Muslims in the late 18th century or the people of India, regardless of religion, were able to stand up and resist the British forces. Next up, we have question number 4. So, what happened on Direct Action Day? Hmm. So, that's where you basically have to talk about how the Muslim League took it upon. So, the Muslim League took it, gave their supporters of Muslim League were given directives to come out and protest against the British and demand a separate homeland. That happened during the elections of 1930 and right after, and that was the time when they decided to actually talk about, sorry, 1940, and right after that, the demand for a separate homeland increased. So right after 1940's resolution, this Direct Action Day was done by the Muslim League. Then you have explained why Gandhi-Jinnah talks of 1944 did not reach an agreement. Now, this is a slightly detailed answer in which you have to point out the fact that Gandhi and Jinnah, by this time, by this time, were at a different level of understanding as far as the fate of the people of the subcontinent was concerned. And the reason why these talks could not actually be more fruitful was because Gandhi did not want India to be partitioned, whereas Jinnah had his heart set on Pakistan. And that was primarily the stumbling block in the negotiations of the two. So, and then how effective has Pakistan been as a member of world organizations between 1947 and 1999? Now, here it's a detailed response of Pakistan's involvement in different organizations such as the OIC, the UN, the CENTO agreement, part of the non-aligned movement. All of these are supposed to be talked about in detail as to how they have fared in the OIC during this time, how have they fared in UN over this time, what was CENTO all about, why was that important until Islamic Revolution of 1979, and what did the non-aligned movement actually mean, and what was the consequences of being a part of that. So all of this is going to be part of this answer in elaborate detail that needs to be written down. So that's about it for this paper, the general gist of which has been explained. Thank you.